Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, the government's new economic team will spend an additional $11 billion to boost the economy, which grew at the slowest pace in nearly 2 years in the second quarter. Today marks the 100th day since the Sewol ferry sank in waters off southwestern Korea. We'll take a closer look into the ongoing investigation and how the teenage survivors are coping. Plus, a Taiwanese passenger jet crashes on the nation's resort island of Penghu, killing dozens of people. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Thursday, July 24th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, Korea's new economic team, led by the new finance minister, Choi Kyung-hwan, has laid out how it plans to breathe fresh life into the sputtering Korean economy.
The focus is on cutting the nation free from a period of low growth by running an expansionary fiscal policy, which will involve nearly $40 billion in government spending. Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Korea's new economic team is all geared up to shake the country out of its low-growth rut. The finance ministry said Thursday that the government will seek aggressive fiscal policies that will boost spending by some 12 trillion won, or roughly $11 billion in the second half of this year. That's equivalent to nearly 1% of Korea's GDP. The extra funds will be used to support homebuyers, small and medium-sized businesses, and tourism, and improve the distribution of agricultural products. The government would also set aside around $25 billion in loans and funds to promote corporate activities. The ministry said it will seek an expansionary fiscal policy, even at the risk of running a short-term fiscal deficit. The government also cited the nation's relatively healthy fiscal situation. Korea's government debt to GDP ratio stood at under 34% last year, far lower than the OECD average of over 110%. The ministry also laid out plans to boost domestic demand by providing tax incentives to companies that raise wages. It also plans to tax companies that shy away from investment, wage increases, or dividend payments in favor of hanging on to excessive cash reserves. The government will also accelerate regulatory reforms, and especially that linked to bolstering the nation's real estate market by giving homebuyers easier access to mortgage loans. The measures are based on the new economic team's revised growth outlook for this year. It cut its growth forecast to 3.7%, down 0.4 percentage points from its earlier projection, saying the pace of recovery slowed on sluggish domestic demand. The government expects its expansionary fiscal policy to raise the growth by 0.1 percentage points this year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And now, in the second quarter, the Korean economy grew at its slowest pace in nearly 2 years. Despite a rise in the country's exports, sluggish domestic demand in the wake of April's Sewol ferry disaster kept growth down. Kim Ji-hyun has the details.
Korea's economic growth took a step backward in the second quarter of the year. The Bank of Korea says gross domestic product increased 0.6% during the April to June period from the previous quarter. That's 0.1 percentage point lower than the central bank's earlier estimate for the second quarter. Central bank officials say growth was hampered by April's Sewol disaster that dampened domestic demand. Private spending was cut by 0.3%.
Due to Sewol ferry disaster, the government could not enforce budgetary matters on schedule, and also there is poor spending sentiment among major participants of the economy. It wasn't more than we thought it would. We will have to wait and see how long this sentiment will continue to affect the economy.
The central bank adds, however, the Korean economy is modestly recovering with rising exports and improving investment. Fueled by a surge in shipments of LCD displays and chemical goods, exports increased 1.9% from the previous quarter. Construction investment inched up 0.6%, while investments in machinery and transportation equipment gained 1.3%. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Major bourses around the world are showing a strong start for the second half amid ample liquidity. Among some 20 key stock markets, Korea's Kosdaq showed the second strongest growth, gaining more than 5% from the end of June until Wednesday as investors snapped up blue chips. Brazil's stock market recorded the biggest surge, up 9% on the back of a stable local currency, while Southeast Asian countries also showed robust growth, led by the Indonesian bourse's 4% rise. In the U.S., the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 3% during the same period to hit the 17,000 mark for the first time ever. Exactly 100 days ago, Korea was rocked by one of the worst maritime disasters in its history. A passenger ferry with nearly 500 people on board capsized and sank in waters off Korea's southeastern coast. 304 people lost their lives on April 16th, and more than 3 months out, the nation is still waiting for answers about what caused the tragedy. Our UDN reports on the widespread investigation that is still unfolding.
It's been 100 days now since their loved ones were taken away from them.
I still try to take in the scent of my son, from his room, his blankets, and his bed. I haven't touched his room at all.
How far has the country come in giving these families the answer they so deserve on why the accident happened and who is responsible? The ruling and opposition parties have still been unable to come to an agreement over a special law on the Sewol accident aimed at uncovering the cause.
The whole nation has been asking for a new Korea, but the Park Geun-hye administration has not been able to take a single step forward since the disaster.
Using the suffering from the Sewol disaster for political gains dishonors the victims and hurts the victims' families.
Demanding progress on the bill, some victims' families have gone on hunger strikes and days-long marches. The massive manhunt for the practical owner of the Sewol ferry Yoo Byung-won ended in vain when it was confirmed earlier this week that his heavily decomposed body was found last month. Taking responsibility over the failure to catch the fugitive shipping tycoon, the senior prosecutor in charge of the investigation, Choi Kyung-hwan, offered to resign. Prosecutors also revealed that Yoo was hiding behind an upstairs wall in one of its villas in the south of the country, and that investigators had searched the building while he was presumably there. The revelations are only adding to the growing distrust of the prosecution, which has funneled massive financial resources into the investigation to no avail. Down in Pengmok Harbor at the site of the accident, search operations continue for the 10 victims that remain unaccounted for. 294 people have been confirmed dead. Yurian, Arirang News.
And staying with the Sewol sinking on this solemn 100-day anniversary, more than 80% of the victims of the ferry sinking were high school students from a school in Ansan. They were on their way for a field trip to Korea's southern Jeju Island. Confused by the crew's misleading instructions, only 75 of 325 students on board the ferry that day survived. In this special report, Song Ji-son tells us how they've been coping.
The road to recovery for the 75 surviving students of the Sewol ferry tragedy continues. After the disaster on April 16th, the students were treated at the same hospital and have been going through group therapy sessions together since. And 1 month ago, on June 25th, they returned to classes at Taiwan High School. Before the tragedy, the class of 2016 was made up of 10 different classes, which has now been reduced to 4. They now study in makeshift classrooms that were originally used as music or art rooms. The homerooms they used before April 16th have been left intact, preserved to honor the memories of those that perished. Their curriculum is different as well. Therapy sessions are held throughout the week, and 10 counselors are available on campus to help the students if and when they need it. To ensure privacy, media outlets are banned from filming the students or their classes.
We do not want any more attention from the public or media. Please refrain from filming or interviewing us.
But some are speaking out, urging people to remember their friends and to put pressure on the government to carry out a thorough investigation of the disaster.
Please do not forget April 16, 2014, the moment you forget about the Sewol ferry disaster. That's when our futures vanish.
While the junior class at Taiwan High School was the most affected by the tragedy, it's touched the lives of everyone there. For senior students prepping for college, it's been hard to study. To provide support, the National Assembly's Educational Committee approved a bill last week that expands the quota for college admissions for those affected by the disaster. Some 500 Taiwan High School seniors and the siblings of the victims will be eligible. 송지선, Arirang News.
A Japanese lawmaker says his country hasn't gone as far as it can towards resolving the still unresolved matter of the thousands of Korean women forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese military during the Second World War. These comments come amid renewed talks on the issue between Seoul and Tokyo. Hwang Ji-hye reports.
An 8-term Japanese lawmaker says Tokyo can do more to resolve the issue of Japanese military's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. At a Heritage Foundation forum in Washington on Wednesday, Takeo Kawamura of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party said Japan has been working to resolve the issue of the so-called comfort women and that it is willing to deal with this. Kawamura added Japan could take the same measures it had done in the past for the 55 surviving Korean victims. These may include providing a letter of apology for the comfort women and some financial compensation from a civilian-led fund. The offer for such civilian-led compensation was rejected by South Korea in the 1990s, as Seoul saw it as the Japanese government's attempt to avoid direct responsibility. Kawamura's remarks come after South Korea and Japan resumed talks on Tokyo's sexual slavery in Seoul on Wednesday, the first such meeting since Japan went back and reviewed its 1993 Kono Statement, which apologized to the so-called comfort women. The Abe administration, while upholding the landmark statement, claimed last month that Seoul was in close consultation with Tokyo when it was being drawn up. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military in the early 20th century. But killing any anticipation for concrete progress between the two neighbors, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga expressed regret over Seoul's reaction. During a press briefing Wednesday, Suga said the review was conducted in an objective manner by experts. Suga added Japan has no plans for new measures to solve the comfort women issue. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
A former senior official at the International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed his concerns over the close ties between North Korea and Iran. In a piece in Foreign Policy magazine on Wednesday, Olli Heinonen said the relationship could lead to a transfer of advanced centrifuge technology. He said Pyongyang has mastered production of the P2 centrifuge, which is much more efficient than the P1 centrifuge Tehran currently uses. Contact between Pyongyang and Tehran continues as recently as February, when Iran's foreign minister met with his North Korean counterpart to boost their bilateral relations. Heinonen said those ties could further complicate international negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, which were recently extended by the UN until November. Now, a judge in the United States has found North Korea liable for damages caused by a series of missile attacks on Israel in the year 2006. In his court ruling Wednesday, U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth said North Korea, along with Iran, provided material support and intelligence training to Hezbollah terrorists who fired a series of rockets into Israel for around a month in 2006. The judge said North Korea gave the terrorists advanced weapons and advice, with Iran mostly giving them the money. A special master will now be assigned to determine the amount of damages the two countries owe, although it is highly questionable how the money will or even could be collected. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Thursday lunchtime. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news centre.
Eunice, there's been yet another passenger plane crash, this time in Taiwan.
It was a TransAsia Airways plane that was on its second landing attempt amid stormy weather conditions when it crashed near the runway. Dozens of passengers died, but there were survivors in that crash. Our Park Ji-won has this story.
A Taiwanese passenger plane crashed Wednesday evening local time, killing 47 and injuring 11 others on board amid stormy weather as it attempted to make an emergency landing at Magong Airport on Penghu Island. The TransAsia Airways turboprop was flying from Taiwan's southwestern Kaohsiung International Airport to Penghu Island off the west coast, carrying 54 passengers and 4 flight crew. Struggling to cope with bad weather conditions brought on by Typhoon Netmo, the plane failed at the emergency landing and crashed near the runway. The Taiwanese government says 11 passengers survived the crash and have been taken to hospital.
Apart from the people who were sent to the hospitals, the remaining people probably died. The fire department just told me that, but we still have to verify the details. I hope there won't be too many casualties.
The president of TransAsia Airways expressed his deep sorrow over the accident.
I solemnly apologize to everyone. I'll apologize for this unfortunate event.
The crashed plane had been in service for 13 years, and the pilot had more than 20 years of experience and about 23,000 flying hours. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council is investigating whether the weather conditions or human error caused the accident. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Turning now to the Middle East, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration has extended its passenger flight ban on Tel Aviv by another 24 hours. This despite protests by the Israeli government and one prominent former U.S. mayor who made a very public trip there. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg arrived in Tel Aviv Wednesday local time via the Israeli national airline El Al. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who greeted him, thanked him for demonstrating that it is safe to fly in and out of Israel. A Hamas spokesman called the U.S. flight ban a great victory for the resistance. Meanwhile, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution that condemns in the strongest terms Israel's offensive on Gaza. 29 countries voted for it, while the U.S. was the lone nation voting against. 17 countries abstained, including South Korea, Germany, and the U.K. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nabi Pillay, said Israel has not done enough to protect civilians and that there is a strong possibility it has violated international law. The black box was recovered from the crash site of downed Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 has been handed to analysts in Great Britain. Earlier, a team of investigators led by the Dutch Safety Board had said there was no evidence the cockpit voice recorders were manipulated after the crash. Meanwhile, on the ground in eastern Ukraine, pro-Russian rebels shot down 2 Ukrainian Air Force jets on Wednesday. Kiev's defense ministry said the planes were hit by missiles fired from the Russian side of the border at an area about 30 kilometers south of the Malaysia jetliner crash site. The Netherlands marked its first day of mourning in 52 years as it received the first bodies of victims who died in that Malaysia jetliner shoot-down. Churches around the country rang their bells, flags were flown at half-staff, and a moment of silence was held for the 298 victims, nearly 200 of whom were Dutch. A hero's welcome was observed at Eindhoven Air Base, where Prime Minister Mark Rutte, members of the Dutch royal family, and relatives of the victims watched the wooden coffins one by one being placed into waiting hearses. Forensic experts in Hilversum will effort to identify the remains, a process that could take months. Some 74 more bodies are due to arrive in the Netherlands on this Thursday.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju with Pro.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics.
The Korean government has confirmed the first case of foot-and-mouth disease in Korea in well over 3 years. Local government officials from Gyeongsangbuk-do province say a pig at a farm in the region was confirmed to have contracted the disease after displaying symptoms. 600 pigs at the farm, that's not all of them, were culled in the early hours of this Thursday morning as a precautionary measure. Local and central governments will also strengthen quarantine measures to prevent the spread of the disease. This latest case comes at a bad time for Korea, as the country has been looking to boost its pork exports. Korea has always prided itself on its ability to innovate and push the boundaries in the sector of science and technology. And in the latest Global Innovation Index 2014, Korea has jumped 2 spots from last year to be ranked the 16th most innovative country in the world. Korea scored slightly over 55 points out of 100. The annual rankings published by Cornell University, INSEAD, and the World Intellectual Property Organization surveyed 143 countries based on 81 categories that measure their innovation capabilities and measurable results. Switzerland topped the list with nearly 65 points, followed by the UK and Sweden.
Now, Korea's thirst for great quality, independently produced craft beer is on the rise. Once dismissed by many as just a fad, time has proven that micro-brewed craft beer is here to stay. Shin Se-min reports.
Here is an interesting collection of craft beer. This one right here has a taste of banana, while this one has a nutty chocolate. The number of the thirsty visiting local bars for artisanal beer has surged in recent days.
Local bars like this offer a variety of beer, each brewed in its own unique way, and all leaving an unforgettable impression on the palate.
I've tried a few of these craft beers, and I like it already. There are different tastes and flavors. I think I'll come back and try some other varieties.
Korea has a growing interest in both craft and imported beer.
Our craft beer sales have been rising over the past couple months, with the monthly sales jumping by 4-fold since we opened.
The nation's imports of beer rose more than 25% in the first half of this year compared to 2013. It set up a new battlefield for the beer market.
Currently, craft beer takes up less than 1% of the beer market, and microbrewers face a long battle if they hope to compete against the large Korean companies. There's a better chance that craft beer will overtake the import beer market if current trends continue.
The growing interest in the more refined beer rose in stride with eased regulations on alcohol in the nation. The taxation on microbrewers has shrunk by 20%, and distribution was recently allowed outside of the microbreweries, which has opened up more markets like local bars and even supermarkets. But some aren't completely satisfied.
They don't go far enough. The already eased rules allow microbrewers to produce more, but we are still limited in how much business we can do.
While there is still more to be done to level the playing field for these smaller craft beer makers, recent months have shown that Koreans are willing to spend a little extra for a little something different. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Well, most of the rain has let up here in Seoul, though drizzling in some areas up north. And all the heavy rain advisory has been lifted about 2 hours ago. And for the upper areas, it's forecast to stop raining this afternoon, but it's going to start to rain heavily again later at night. 10 to 40 millimeters of showers are expected, and as we can see, southern regions will also receive showers in the afternoon. So the whole nation is expected to receive monsoon rain today, but the southern provinces will not get much relief from the heat today, as a heat wave advisory is still in place for many regions there, while the upper regions should have temperatures similar to yesterday. So let's take a closer look at those numbers. The high in Seoul will rise to 28, while Daegu will climb to 34, and Gwangju and Busan will have daily highs of 29 and 30 respectively. And for other regions, Jeju Island, Daejeon and Dokdo should all see highs of 30 today. Well, we're expecting monsoon rain until Saturday, and the rain could be heavy at times, I would say mostly at night, so keep that in mind and plan ahead for your weekend. Take the weather into consideration. That's all from me today, and back to you guys in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jion, for your weather advice there. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you for watching.